The village was small, just a handful of wooden shacks and a dusty road cutting through the center. Emma lived on the edge of it all, in a rickety cabin her father built with his own hands before he died. She had little to her name, just a horse, a handful of worn dresses, and a heart that believed in kindness despite the world's cruelty. But when Sheriff Dalton pounded on her door that morning, his voice loud and cold as the frost on the windows, everything changed. "Emma Carson, you're under arrest for theft," he shouted, and the air seemed to freeze around her. She didn't move, didn't breathe, couldn't comprehend what he was saying. "I didn't steal anything," she whispered, but his rough hands grabbed her wrists, binding them with coarse rope. "Old man Riggins says otherwise," the sheriff grunted, shoving her toward his horse. Emma's mind raced. Riggins? The crotchety store owner who glared at her every time she came for flour? "He says you took money from the register last night," the sheriff continued, yanking her up into the saddle. Her heart pounded, and tears threatened, but she bit them back. "I wasn't even there," she insisted. The sheriff didn't listen. By the time they reached the center of town, people had gathered, curious, judgmental eyes cutting into her. "Thief!" someone shouted. A stone struck her shoulder. "Serves her right," another voice hissed. As the sheriff dragged her toward the jailhouse, Emma caught sight of one face in the crowd that didn't look angry. Tommy, her childhood friend, his blue eyes wide with worry. She hadn't seen him since he left for the mines months ago. What was he doing back? Before she could think on it, she was shoved into a cell, the iron bars clanging shut, and the sheriff spat on the ground. "You'll hang for this," he muttered, leaving her alone in the dark, damp cell. Emma sank to the floor, her mind spinning. How could this be happening? Who would believe her word against Riggins? Suddenly, a soft tapping on the window caught her attention. She turned, heart racing, and there was Tommy, his face pressed to the glass. "Emma, I know you didn't do it," he whispered. "I'm getting you out of here." Tommy's words echoed in her mind long after his face disappeared from the window. Emma sat huddled against the cold stone wall, her wrists raw from the ropes, her heart pounding like a drum in her chest. How could Tommy get her out of here? What could he possibly do against the sheriff, against old man Riggins, against a town that had already decided she was guilty? Hours dragged by, each second marked by the drip of water leaking from the ceiling, the creak of the wooden door, the muffled voices of men outside planning her execution. "A thief and a liar," someone sneered. What else would you expect from her? Emma squeezed her eyes shut, her mind reeling back to that night. She had been at home, alone, as she always was. The fire had burned low, and she had watched the flames dance, the silence heavy in her ears. She hadn't stepped foot near Riggins' store, hadn't stolen a single coin. But it didn't matter. They wanted a scapegoat, and she was the easiest target. The poor girl with no family, no money, no power. The door creaked open and Sheriff Dalton stepped inside, a smirk twisting his greasy face. "Looks like we found the money," he said, holding up a sack of coins. Emma's blood ran cold. "That's not mine," she said, her voice trembling. "It was in your cabin, under the floorboards," the sheriff said, his eyes gleaming with cruel satisfaction. "Guess you're not as smart as you think." Emma's stomach twisted. How had the money gotten there? Had someone planted it? But who? And why? The sheriff leaned closer, his foul breath washing over her. "Riggins wants you to hang, girl. Says it's the only way to teach the rest of you filthy thieves a lesson." Emma's hands clenched into fists. They were going to kill her. But then the sheriff straightened, his smirk widening. "Unless you confess," he said, his voice soft as a snake's hiss. "Admit you did it, and maybe, just maybe, I can convince Riggins to let you live." Emma swallowed hard, her throat dry as sand. Confess to a crime she didn't commit, beg for mercy from the same people who wanted her dead. "I'm not a thief," she said, her voice steady. The sheriff's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening. "Then I guess you'd better start praying," he said, slamming the cell door behind him. Emma pressed her forehead against the cold bars, her breaths coming fast and shallow. Outside, the town continued to buzz with whispers and accusations, the crowd growing larger, louder. And somewhere out there, Tommy was plotting her escape. The night swallowed the town. The streets empty except for the flickering lanterns swinging from porches and the occasional drunken shout echoing from the saloon. Emma sat in the corner of the cell, knees pulled to her chest, shivering against the cold. Her thoughts chased each other like wild horses, each one more frantic than the last. Who had planted the money in her cabin? Who hated her enough to see her hang? Footsteps echoed outside, and Emma's heart leaped into her throat. The door creaked open, and Tommy slipped inside, his face shadowed beneath the brim of a worn hat. "Emma," he whispered, crouching beside the bars. "Are you okay?" She nodded, though her eyes stung with unshed tears. "They found the money in my house, Tommy," she said, voice breaking. "They're going to hang me." Tommy's jaw clenched, his fists tightening around the metal bars. "It's Riggins. He's setting you up," he said, his eyes flashing with fury. "I saw him talking to the sheriff, slipping him a bag of coins. They're in on it together." Emma's stomach churned. "But why? Why me?" Tommy's face darkened. "Riggins wants your land. Your father owed him money before he died. If you're gone, the land goes to Riggins." Emma's blood ran cold. Of course, the cabin, the few acres of forest. It was all she had left, all her father had worked so hard to keep. "They're going to kill me for a piece of dirt," she whispered, voice trembling. "Not if I can help it," Tommy said, eyes hardening. "I have a plan." Emma swallowed, her gaze searching his face. "What plan?" Tommy reached into his coat and pulled out a small knife, its blade gleaming in the moonlight. "Tonight, when the guards switch shifts, I'll distract them. You use this to cut through the ropes. Meet me by the creek behind the jail. We'll ride out to the next town and find someone who can help us prove your innocence." Emma's heart hammered against her rib cage. Run? Leave everything behind? But what choice did she have? "What about Riggins?" she asked, her voice a shaky whisper. Tommy's jaw set, his eyes hard as flint. "I'll handle him." Emma took the knife, her fingers trembling as she shoved it beneath her dress, her heart pounding like a war drum. "Be ready," Tommy said, his gaze fierce. "At midnight." Then he was gone, slipping back into the shadows as the sheriff's heavy footsteps echoed closer. Emma pressed her back against the wall, her fingers gripping the knife beneath her dress, her breaths shallow and fast. Midnight. It was her only chance. But if they caught her trying to escape, they wouldn't just hang her, they'd kill Tommy too. Midnight came slowly, each second a heartbeat pounding in Emma's ears. The jailhouse was eerily quiet. The only sound the creak of wooden beams and the wind moaning through the cracks in the walls. Emma sat in the darkness, the knife pressed against her thigh beneath the folds of her dress, her breaths shallow and quick. Outside, the night was black as ink, the sky moonless, clouds swallowing every star. The clock tower struck 12, each chime echoing through the empty streets. Emma's fingers trembled as she felt for the ropes binding her wrists, the rough fibers scraping against her raw skin. Carefully, she slid the knife beneath the cords, sawing back and forth, the blade nicking her skin, but she didn't care. All she could think of was Tommy's words. "Meet me by the creek. Run. Prove your innocence." The ropes finally gave way, and Emma's wrists were free. She sucked in a breath, rubbing the circulation back into her numb hands. Outside, voices rose, a low, drunken drawl followed by a burst of raucous laughter. The guards. Tommy was doing his part, creating a distraction. Emma crept toward the cell door, her heart pounding so loud she was sure they would hear it. She peered through the bars. Sheriff Dalton leaned against the wooden post, a bottle of whiskey in one hand, his other arm slung around a woman Emma recognized from the saloon. "You sure she's in there?" the woman asked, her voice slurred. "Ain't going nowhere," Dalton grunted, taking a swig of whiskey. "Not till Riggins gets his way." Emma's blood boiled. Riggins. The man who wanted her dead. The man who had framed her for a crime she didn't commit. The man who was willing to kill her just to steal a patch of land that wasn't worth more than a few dollars. But before Emma could think of a plan, a shadow moved outside the window. A familiar shape, tall and lean. Tommy. His eyes met hers, and he nodded, a silent command. Now. Emma gripped the knife tighter, steeling herself. She slid the blade through the lock, jiggling it back and forth, her hands shaking as the metal scraped against metal. Come on, come on. The lock clicked open. Emma pushed the door gently, the hinges groaning like a dying animal. She slipped through the gap, her bare feet silent against the cold floor, every nerve in her body screaming for her to run. Tommy waved her over, his expression tight and urgent. This way, he whispered, grabbing her hand and pulling her into the shadows. Together they crept along the side of the building, ducking beneath the window where Dalton still stood, too drunk to notice anything but the bottle in his hand. She'll hang tomorrow, he slurred, and Emma's heart clenched. Tomorrow. If they didn't get far enough tonight, they'd hunt her down. They'd drag her back. They'd hang her without a trial, without a second thought. Tommy squeezed her hand, his eyes fierce. Trust me, he said, his breath hot against her ear. We're getting out of here. And with that, they ran. Into the night, into the woods, into the darkness where the only sounds were the snap of branches beneath their feet and the thunder of their hearts beating in unison. Branches whipped against Emma's face as she and Tommy tore through the woods, their breaths ragged, their steps frantic. The night was a black void, the trees closing in around them like skeletal hands, each shadow a lurking threat. Emma's legs burned, her feet raw and bleeding against the sharp rocks and twisted roots. But she didn't dare stop. Tommy's grip on her wrist was iron tight, his jaw clenched as he led her deeper into the forest. Where are we going? Emma gasped, her voice trembling. The creek, Tommy said, his eyes scanning the darkness. We'll follow it north. There's an old trapper's cabin out there. No one knows about it but me. Emma swallowed, her throat parched, her lungs aching. Behind them, a shout echoed through the trees. The sheriff's voice, slurred with whiskey and rage. Emma Carson, you can run, but you can't hide. Emma's pulse spiked. They know we're gone, she whispered. They'll come after us. Tommy's jaw tightened. Then we keep moving. They crashed through the underbrush, the ground uneven and treacherous beneath their feet. The creek came into view, a silver ribbon winding through the trees, its surface glittering beneath the sliver of moonlight that pierced the clouds. There, Tommy said, pulling Emma toward the water. We can lose our scent in the stream. Without another word, he plunged into the icy water, dragging Emma with him. The cold stole her breath, her teeth chattering as they waded through the creek, water sloshing against her thighs, the current threatening to drag her under. Almost there, Tommy said, his voice tight. Just keep moving. But then, a crack echoed through the night. A gunshot. Emma's heart slammed against her ribs. Tommy, she cried, spinning around. He yanked her down, both of them dropping to the ground, their bodies half submerged in the freezing water. Stay down, he whispered, his face inches from hers. They're shooting blind. Just stay quiet. Another shot rang out, closer this time. Emma's breath hitched, her fingers digging into the mud as she pressed herself against the bank. The night was a chorus of shouts and snapping branches, the sheriff's men crashing through the woods like wild animals. They went this way, one of them yelled. I heard him in the water. Emma's blood ran cold. If they found them now, it was over. They'd drag her back to town, string her up like an animal, and Tommy would pay for helping her. We have to move, Tommy whispered, his breath hot against her ear. On my count. 3, 2, 1. They sprang up, water streaming down their legs, and sprinted through the creek, the icy current biting at their ankles, the shouts growing louder behind them. There, a voice shouted. I see them! Emma's legs burned, her lungs screaming for air, but she couldn't stop. Not now. Not when freedom was just a heartbeat away. The night pressed in around them like a suffocating shroud. every sound amplified. The crunch of leaves beneath their feet, the labored breaths that echoed in Emma's ears, the frantic pounding of her heart. Tommy dragged her forward, his grip iron-strong around her wrist as they pushed deeper into the woods, the shouts of the sheriff's men fading behind them. "We need to get to higher ground," Tommy muttered, his eyes darting through the darkness. "If we can make it to the ridge, they won't find us." Emma's legs trembled beneath her, each step a struggle against exhaustion and the biting cold that seeped through her wet clothes. The creek water had soaked her dress, the fabric clinging to her like a second skin, and her feet were numb, each step a fresh burst of pain against the rocks and twigs. "Tommy," she panted, her voice breaking. I can't go any farther." But Tommy didn't slow. "You have to," he said, his jaw tight, his gaze hard as flint. "If they catch you, they'll hang you, Emma, and they'll kill me for helping you." The words jolted through her like a bolt of lightning. Tommy was risking everything for her, for a girl he hadn't seen in months, a girl the whole town now believed was a thief. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice small and desperate. "Why would you help me?" Tommy's eyes flicked to hers, and for a moment she saw the boy she used to know, the boy who used to chase fireflies with her in the summer, who used to sit beside her on the porch and play the harmonica while she sang. "Because I know you, Emma," he said, his voice rough. "And I know you didn't do it." Emma's throat tightened, the words lodging like a stone in her chest. Before she could speak, a sharp cry echoed through the woods, followed by the crack of a branch. "They're close," Tommy said, his eyes flashing with fear. "We need to split up." Emma's heart lurched. "What? No!" "It's the only way," Tommy said, his face grim. "I'll lead them off your trail. You keep heading north. The cabin is just over the ridge. There's a trapdoor beneath the floorboards. Hide there until I come for you." Emma's chest tightened, fear clawing at her insides. "But what about you?" Tommy's jaw clenched. "I'll be fine," he said, though his eyes betrayed the lie. "Just go, and whatever you do, don't stop running." Emma swallowed, her pulse roaring in her ears. "Tommy!" But he was already turning away, his silhouette melting into the darkness. "Go!" he shouted, and then he was gone, the sound of his footsteps crashing through the underbrush, drawing the sheriff's men away from her. Emma bit her lip, tears stinging her eyes as she turned and ran, the cold wind biting at her cheeks, the night swallowing her whole. Each step echoed with Tommy's words, "Don't stop running. Don't stop." And so she ran, into the night, into the dark, into the unknown, the sound of the sheriff's men and their bloodhounds fading into the distance as she scrambled up the ridge, her legs burning, her lungs screaming. And somewhere behind her, Tommy was risking his life to give her a chance to live. Emma's legs burned as she climbed the ridge, the muscles screaming beneath her skin, each step a battle against the aching cold and the fear that gnawed at her insides. The wind howled through the trees, whipping her wet dress against her legs, and the night seemed to close in around her like a living thing, breathing, watching, waiting. She could still hear the shouts in the distance, the sheriff's men crashing through the woods, the baying of the bloodhounds slicing through the night like a knife. Somewhere down there, Tommy was running, leading them away from her, risking his life so she could escape. But how long could he keep it up? How long before they caught him? Or worse. Emma's chest tightened, the thought twisting like a knife inside her. She wanted to turn back, to find him, to help him. But Tommy's words echoed in her head. "Keep moving, don't stop. The cabin is just over the ridge." Emma gritted her teeth and pushed forward, her feet slipping on the slick ground as she climbed higher, the wind stinging her eyes and blurring her vision. At last, she reached the top, the trees thinning to reveal a clearing bathed in the pale light of the moon. There it was, the cabin. Small, dark, and half hidden beneath the branches of an old pine, its roof sagging beneath the weight of years. Emma stumbled toward it, her breath ragged, her heart pounding so hard it echoed in her ears. She reached the door and shoved it open, the wood groaning beneath her weight. Inside, the cabin was empty, except for a tattered blanket draped over a wooden cot and a single oil lamp that sat cold and dark on the floor. Emma dropped to her knees, her fingers fumbling as she felt along the floorboards, searching for the trap door Tommy had mentioned. Her hands shook, her breaths coming in short, sharp bursts as she pressed against the wood, desperate to find the hidden latch. There, her fingertips brushed against a small metal ring embedded in the floor. Emma yanked it up, the door creaking open to reveal a dark, musty hole just big enough for her to crawl inside. Without thinking, she climbed in, her body folding into the cramped space, her knees pressed to her chest as she pulled the door shut above her. Darkness swallowed her, the air thick and heavy, the scent of earth and rotting wood filling her nose. Emma pressed her hand to her mouth, fighting the urge to sob, her heart hammering against her ribs as she listened. Outside, the wind howled, the trees creaking and groaning like restless spirits. And then, footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, right outside the cabin door. Emma's blood ran cold, her breath freezing in her lungs as she strained to listen, every muscle in her body going rigid. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until they stopped just above her. Emma squeezed her eyes shut, praying, pleading, her heart slamming against her ribs so hard she thought it might break. And then, the door creaked open. The door creaked open, the sound a slow, agonizing groan that echoed through the empty cabin. Emma pressed herself deeper into the cramped space beneath the floorboards, her knees pulled tight to her chest, her breath shallow and rapid as she tried to stay utterly still. Above her, boots thudded against the wooden planks, each step a heavy, deliberate threat. Whoever it was, they were taking their time, moving slowly, methodically, as if searching for something or someone. Emma bit her lip, her pulse a wild, frantic drumbeat in her ears. The scent of damp earth filled her nose, the air thick and stale as she fought to breathe without making a sound. "Ain't nobody here," a man's voice grunted, gravelly and deep. "But the sheriff swore he saw her run this way," another man said, his tone edged with frustration. "Maybe she doubled back," the first man snorted. "Or maybe she's smarter than she looks." Emma's fists clenched, her nails digging into her palms as she listened to them move around the cabin, boots scuffing against the floor, the wooden boards creaking beneath their weight. "Sheriff's gonna hang her for sure," the second man muttered. "You hear what she did? Robbed old Riggins blind, then tried to stab the sheriff." Emma's jaw clenched, fury sparking in her chest. Lies, all of it. They'd twisted the truth, painted her as a monster, a thief, a murderer. But it didn't matter what she said. No one would believe her. Not now. Not after they'd planted the money in her cabin. Spread their lies through the town. Made sure everyone saw her as guilty. "You checked the back?" the first man asked. "Yeah," the other replied. "Nothing but trees and rocks." The first man grunted. "Let's get out of here. Sheriff wants us back at the jailhouse." Emma held her breath as the footsteps drew closer, the boards above her head groaning beneath their weight. "Please go away. Please don't look down. Please." The footsteps paused right above her, and Emma's heart stopped. "Wait," the first man said, his voice sharp, suspicious. "What's that smell?" Emma's pulse pounded so loud she was sure they could hear it. The first man crouched, his face just inches above the floorboards, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the room. "Probably a dead rat," the second man said, impatient. "Come on, let's go. If the girl's out here, she'll freeze to death before dawn anyway." A long, tense pause. Then the first man straightened, his boots thudding against the floor as he turned away. "Fine," he muttered. "Let's get out of here." The door slammed shut, the sound reverberating through the cabin, and Emma finally allowed herself to breathe. Air rushed into her lungs, hot and thick, and she pressed a hand to her mouth, tears stinging her eyes. They were gone, for now. But they'd be back, and if Tommy didn't come for her soon, she'd be as good as dead. The darkness pressed in, suffocating and heavy, as Emma huddled beneath the floorboards, her knees drawn tight to her chest, her breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. Every creak of the wind against the cabin walls made her flinch. Every rustle of the leaves outside made her heart jump. How long had she been down here? Hours? Days? Time had become a blurry, shapeless thing, each second stretching out like an eternity as she waited, her mind filled with thoughts of Tommy. Where was he? Had they caught him? Had he escaped? Had he abandoned her? Emma clenched her fists, nails biting into her palms, forcing herself to stay calm. Tommy wouldn't leave her. He wouldn't, not after everything he'd done to save her. But as the minutes dragged on, her faith began to crack, and the gnawing, insidious voice of doubt crept in. What if he was dead? What if they'd caught him, beaten him, dragged him back to town to face the sheriff's wrath? What if he'd died trying to save her, and now she was alone, hiding beneath the floorboards of a rotting cabin with no plan, no hope, no future? A sob clawed its way up her throat, but she swallowed it down, biting her lip until she tasted blood. No, she couldn't think like that. She couldn't fall apart now, not when her life was hanging by a thread. Outside, the wind picked up, howling through the trees like a chorus of angry ghosts. Emma pressed her hands over her ears, trying to block it out, trying to focus, trying to stay calm. But then, through the wail of the wind, she heard something else. A voice. A low, muffled voice, coming from somewhere outside the cabin. Emma's heart leaped, her breath catching in her throat. Was it Tommy? Or was it them? The sheriff's men come back to search the cabin again? Emma pressed her ear against the floorboards, straining to hear, her pulse pounding like a war drum. Emma! The voice was closer now, urgent, frantic. Emma, where are you? Tommy. Relief flooded through her, so intense it left her dizzy. Emma scrambled to her feet, her hands shaking as she pushed open the trapdoor and climbed out, her legs weak and unsteady beneath her. Tommy! She called, her voice breaking. The cabin door burst open, and there he was, his face bruised and bloodied, his clothes torn and dirty, his eyes wild with desperation. Emma! He cried, rushing toward her, his arms wrapping around her, holding her so tight it hurt. You're okay, he whispered, his breath hot against her ear, his hands trembling as he held her. You're okay. Emma clung to him, her fingers digging into his back, her face buried in his shoulder. I thought you were dead, she choked out, the words a sob. I thought they killed you. Tommy pulled back, cupping her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears. They almost did, he said, his voice tight. But I got away. And now we have to go. Emma's brows knitted together, confusion twisting in her chest. Go where? Tommy's jaw clenched, his eyes dark and fierce. To the sheriff's office, he said. We're going to end this once and for all. Emma's heart pounded as she clung to Tommy, his arm wrapped around her waist as they made their way through the dark woods. The night was thick with fog, the air cold and heavy, each step echoing through the silence like a drumbeat. Are you sure about this? Emma whispered, her breath clouding in the icy air. We go to the sheriff's office. We're walking straight into a trap. Tommy's jaw clenched, his gaze fixed ahead. It's the only way, he said, his voice hard. If we keep running, they'll never stop hunting us. But if we go back, if we can prove Riggins framed you... Emma swallowed, her stomach twisting into knots. And how do we do that? Tommy's eyes flicked to hers, dark and determined. By making Riggins confess. They reached the edge of the woods, the town looming ahead like a sleeping beast, the windows dark, the streets empty. The sheriff's office stood at the center, a single lantern flickering on the porch. Stay close, Tommy whispered, his hand tightening around hers. Together they crept through the shadows, moving silently along the back wall of the sheriff's office. The window was open, a thin sliver of light spilling out onto the dirt. Voices echoed from inside, low and heated. I did what you asked, the sheriff was saying, his words slurred with whiskey. I planted the money. I made her look guilty. Now where's my cut? Emma's breath caught in her throat. Riggins's voice answered, cold and oily. You'll get your money once she's dead, and she will be. Tomorrow morning, first light, No trial, no witnesses. Just a rope and a drop. Emma's stomach twisted, bile rising in her throat. "We have to stop them," she whispered, her nails digging into Tommy's arm. But before Tommy could answer, a gunshot rang out, echoing through the night. Emma flinched, her heart leaping into her throat. "What was that?" Tommy's eyes widened, his jaw clenched. "Stay here," he said, but Emma grabbed his arm. "No," she said, her voice firm. "I'm coming with you." Together, they crept around the side of the building, the moonlight casting long shadows across the dirt. The back door hung open, swinging in the wind. Inside, the sheriff lay sprawled across the floor, blood pooling beneath his head, his eyes wide and lifeless. Riggins stood over him, a smoking pistol in his hand, his face a mask of fury. "You were supposed to keep your mouth shut," he muttered, his chest heaving. Emma's breath caught. Riggins turned, his eyes landing on them, his face twisting into a sneer. "Well, well," he said, raising the gun, the barrel gleaming in the dim light. "Looks like the little thief and her rat of a friend decided to come home." Tommy stepped forward, his fists clenched. "We know what you did," he said, his voice hard. "You framed Emma. You killed the sheriff. You think you can get away with this?" Riggins chuckled, the sound low and dark. "Get away with it?" he said, cocking the gun. "Boy, I already have." But before he could pull the trigger, Emma lunged forward, grabbing a piece of broken glass from the floor and slashing at Riggins's arm. The gun clattered to the ground, and Tommy rushed forward, tackling Riggins to the floor. They struggled, fists flying, the sound of grunts and curses echoing through the room. Emma scrambled for the gun, her hands shaking as she picked it up, the cold metal heavy in her grip. "Tommy!" she shouted, and he rolled away just as Riggins lunged for him. Emma aimed the gun, her hands trembling, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. "Don't move!" she said, her voice shaking. Riggins froze, his eyes wide and furious. "You wouldn't dare," he sneered. "You're just a scared little girl." Emma's jaw clenched, her eyes blazing. "Not anymore,"